A reclusive millionaire hides more than just scars on his skin. The young maid sent to his mansion never imagined what she would be forced to touch. An unusual request, a boundary crossed. If you like stories of love and romance, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment saying where you are watching from. In the mountainous region of Virginia, where morning fog drifts between deep valleys and century-old mansions, guard memories of times that refuse to die, stands Montgomery Estate, an imposing property, suffocated by heavy traditions and walls that know more secrets than visitors. There lives Sebastian Montgomery, a 46-year-old man heir to a fortune built on coffee, mining, and businesses that prefer not to see the light of day. Isolated from the world after an accident that tore apart his soul as much as his body, Sebastian has become a shadow of the businessman who once commanded financial empires from his office in Richmond. The accident happened 2 years ago on a winding mountain road during a storm that seemed to have emerged from the darkest nightmares. Since then, he has not allowed anyone to touch him, not the private doctors his fortune could buy, not the physical therapists recommended by the best hospitals in the country, not the psychologists who tried to break through the barriers of his stubborn silence. Sebastian lives locked in the east wing of the estate, surrounded by books of German philosophy, mirrors covered with white sheets, and an emptiness that spreads through the rooms like an invisible plague, contaminating every piece of furniture, every painting, every breath. The estate's routine functions around him like a Swiss clock. The staff care for the animals, maintain the gardens, prepare meals he barely touches. Mrs. Connie, the housekeeper who has worked for the family for more than 30 years, runs the house with an iron hand and a broken heart, watching her employer wither away in life. She was the one who suggested hiring someone new, someone who wouldn't carry the weight of pitying glances or shared memories. That was how Ellen Carter came to them. Ellen is 22 years old and comes from Oakwood, a small town where everyone knows everyone and where secrets circulate faster than gossip at the church door. Raised by her grandmother Mary Graves after her parents died in a bus accident when she was only 8, Ellen grew up between morning prayers, handicrafts, and a strict education that taught her to see the world through very specific moral lenses. Her purity isn't just physical, it's emotional, almost spiritual. She never allowed herself to feel the weight of desire without the guilt that her grandmother planted in her heart like seeds of fear. When the opportunity to work at Montgomery Estate appeared through a domestic employment agency in Richmond, Ellen saw it as a chance to earn a salary that could support her grandmother, who was becoming increasingly frail, and perhaps save enough money to take the nursing course she had always dreamed of. What she didn't imagine was that the silences of those enormous corridors would pull her into an emotional web from which it would be impossible to emerge unscathed. In the first days, Ellen barely saw Sebastian. Mrs. Connie explained that he preferred to remain isolated, that he had his quirks and schedules, and that her job would be to clean the East Wing, prepare his meals, and occasionally help with small personal tasks. Ellen accepted everything without questioning, accustomed to obeying since childhood. But there was something in the atmosphere of that house that disturbed her. It wasn't just the corridors that were too long, or the portraits of ancestors that seemed to observe her with disapproval. It was a sense of incompleteness, as if the entire estate was waiting for something or for someone. The first time Ellen saw Sebastian was on a Thursday afternoon when she was bringing his lunch to the EI study. He had his back turned, looking out the window that faced the mountains, his profile silhouetted against the golden light filtering through the heavy curtains. Even without seeing his face, Ellen felt something move inside her chest, a mixture of curiosity and compassion that surprised her. There was such a palpable loneliness emanating from that man that she had to hold herself back from asking if he was okay. Sebastian didn't even turn around when she placed the tray on the desk. He merely murmured an almost inaudible, "Thank you," his voice hoarse from speaking little and smiling even less. During the following weeks, these silent encounters became routine. Ellen would enter, leave the food, sometimes arrange some papers or books and leave without them exchanging more than a few polite words. But she began to observe him more carefully. She noticed that he limped slightly on his left leg. His shoulders were always tense, as if carrying an invisible weight, that sometimes she found him massaging his own neck with an expression of pain that he tried to hide. And it was by observing these small things that Ellen began to care for him in a way that she couldn't explain even to herself. It was on a Friday morning, while Ellen was organizing the study's library, that Mrs. Connie appeared with a grave expression on her wrinkled face. The housekeeper carried in her hand a small dark glass bottle and a sheet of paper with handwritten medical instructions. "Ellen, child, I need to talk to you about something important." Mrs. Connie's voice carried that tone she used when the matter was serious. "Dr. Henry, the master's private physician, left these instructions yesterday. It's a new treatment for the muscle pain and insomnia that have been tormenting Sebastian since the accident." Ellen stopped arranging the books and turned around, feeling a strange chill in her stomach. Mrs. Connie continued, avoiding direct eye contact with the young woman. "He needs someone to apply this cream every night on his shoulders and back. It's a special medication, imported, that helps relax the muscles and sleep better. The problem is—" The housekeeper paused, as if the words were difficult to pronounce. "The master doesn't let anyone touch him. Not me, who has known him since he was a boy. Not the nurses we've already tried to hire, but maybe with you it will be different. You're new here. You don't have history with the family. Maybe he'll accept you." Ellen felt the blood rise to her face. The idea of touching Sebastian Montgomery, of seeing his bare skin, of being so close to him in the intimacy of a medical treatment, awakened in her a confusion of feelings that frightened her. The strict upbringing she received from her grandmother screamed that this wasn't right, that a decent young woman shouldn't accept such a task. But there was also a burning curiosity, a desire to help that she didn't know where it came from. "Mrs. Connie, I don't know if I'm the right person for this. I've never—" Ellen stammered, her cheeks burning with flames. "I mean, I don't have experience with this sort of thing." The housekeeper approached and placed a maternal hand on the young woman's arm. "Child, it's nothing improper. It's just a medical treatment. The doctor was very clear. Without this, the master will continue to suffer, and the insomnia is getting worse every day. Have you noticed how thin he is, how sunken his eyes are? He needs help, and maybe you're the only person he will accept." That night, Ellen went up to Sebastian's room with trembling hands and her heart beating so hard she was sure he would be able to hear it. She knocked lightly on the door and waited for the hoarse voice that invited her to enter. The room was bathed in a golden half-light, illuminated only by a bedside lamp and the embers that still glowed in the fireplace. Sebastian was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing only a cotton t-shirt and dark pajama pants. When he saw Ellen with the bottle of cream in her hand, his eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Connie spoke to me about the treatment," Ellen said, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. "You need to take off your shirt." For a moment, Ellen thought he was going to refuse. Sebastian remained motionless, his gaze fixed on her, as if assessing whether he could trust her. Then, slowly, he pulled the shirt over his head and tossed it onto a nearby chair. Ellen had to force herself not to gasp out loud. Sebastian's back was broad, muscular despite his recent thinness, but marked by scars that told the story of the accident. There was an irregular line that ran from his right shoulder to the middle of his back, and other smaller ones scattered across his tanned skin. "You can begin," he said, lying face down on the bed without looking at her. Ellen approached carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal. She poured some of the cream into the palms of her hands and rubbed them together to warm it. When she touched Sebastian's skin for the first time, they both stiffened. It was as if an electric current had passed between them. Ellen felt the temperature of her own skin change, a wave of heat rising from her chest to her face. Sebastian let out a low, almost inaudible sigh, but she heard it. With cautious movements, Ellen began to spread the cream across his shoulders, following the medical instructions that Mrs. Connie had given her. Sebastian's skin was warm and she could feel the tension in his muscles, like stretched cords about to break. With each touch, Ellen noticed that he relaxed a little more, his breathing becoming deeper and more regular. "Is it hurting?" she asked when she felt him contract his muscles under her hands. "No," he replied, his voice muffled by the pillow. Continue. Ellen worked in silence, her hands gaining confidence with each movement. There was something almost sacred in that moment, an intimacy that transcended the physical. She could feel that each inch touched awakened not only Sebastian's skin but buried memories, emotions that he had locked away with 7 keys. And he, in turn, began to experience sensations he thought were dead forever. Tenderness, fragility, the desperate desire to be seen without armor. When she finished, Ellen cleaned her hands on a towel she had brought and took a step back. Sebastian remained lying down for a few minutes, as if he feared that movement would break the spell of that moment. Finally, he turned over and sat up on the bed, pulling his shirt back on. His eyes met hers for the first time that night, and Ellen saw in them a vulnerability that made her want to cry. "Thank you," he said, his voice even hoarser than usual. "Tomorrow, same time?" Ellen merely nodded, not trusting her own voice. She left, the room walking slowly, but as soon as she closed the door, she leaned against the wall of the corridor and let the tears fall. She didn't know why she was crying, only that something inside her had changed forever. The days that followed transformed that nightly ritual into something that Ellen awaited with an anxiety that embarrassed her and at the same time set her on fire inside. Every night at the same time, she climbed the wooden stairs that led to Sebastian's room, the bottle of cream in her trembling hands and her heart racing. And every night, he waited for her in the same position, sitting on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the window that faced the dark mountains. What began as a medical treatment was transforming into something much deeper and more dangerous. Ellen noticed how Sebastian relaxed completely under her touch, how his breathing calmed when her hands worked on the knots of tension that accumulated in his shoulders. There were moments when she swore he moaned softly, a guttural sound that made her stomach contract in a way she had never felt before. On the 5th night, when Ellen was massaging a particularly deep scar near his right shoulder blade, Sebastian spoke for the first time during the treatment. "This one was the worst," he said, his voice coming out muffled against the pillow. "A piece of metal from the car. The doctors said it nearly hit my lung." Ellen felt a tightness in her chest. Her hands paused for a moment over the irregular mark on his skin. "What happened that night?" she asked, her voice coming out lower than she intended. Sebastian was silent for so long that Ellen thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his words carried a weight that made the air in the room feel denser. "I was running away," he said. "From myself, mainly. Driving through the mountains in the middle of a storm, not caring if I would arrive at my destination alive, and I almost didn't make it." Ellen felt tears sting her eyes. Without thinking, she leaned down and gently kissed the scar, a gesture so natural and spontaneous that it surprised her. Sebastian stiffened completely beneath her, his breath caught in his throat. Ellen quickly moved away, her face burning with shame. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have," she began, but Sebastian turned over on the bed and held her by the wrist, his dark eyes fixed on hers. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "It's been years since anyone touched me with kindness." They remained there, frozen in time, she sitting on the edge of the bed, he holding her wrist as if it were an anchor. Ellen could feel his accelerated pulse at the tip of her fingers, could see his dilated pupils, his irregular breathing. There was an intensity in that gaze that frightened and attracted her at the same time. "Ellen," he whispered her name like a prayer, and she felt a shiver run down her entire spine. But the moment was broken by the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Ellen rose quickly, smoothing her skirt with nervous hands, while Sebastian covered himself with the sheet. Mrs. Connie passed by the door without entering, but Ellen was certain that she had noticed something different. That night, Ellen could barely sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sebastian's face, felt the warmth of his skin under her hands, heard the way he had whispered her name. And then the dreams began. Strange dreams, too vivid to be merely creations of her mind. Ellen dreamed of a woman with long brown hair, wearing a white nightgown, who screamed without emitting any sound. The woman was in a room that Ellen didn't recognize, a room with machines that made mechanical noises, and a window that overlooked a garden she had never seen on the estate. In the dreams, Ellen felt a desperation that wasn't her own, a profound anguish that woke her in the middle of the night, with her heart racing and tears in her eyes. There was something familiar in that woman's face, something that Ellen couldn't identify, but that disturbed her deeply. During the following day, she tried to ignore the dreams, focusing on household tasks with an almost obsessive dedication. But there was something different in the air of the estate, a tension that she didn't know where it came from. Mrs. Connie observed her more attentively, asking questions about how she was adapting to the work, if she was sleeping well, if she needed anything. Ellen responded politely, but felt that the housekeeper was probing something deeper. It was during lunch that Ellen noticed something that intrigued her. There was a wing of the estate that she had never explored, a long corridor that branched off from the main hall and disappeared around a curve that hid what lay beyond. Every time she asked about that part of the house, the answers were evasive. Mrs. Connie said they were just old rooms that were no longer used. Other employees quickly changed the subject, but Ellen had grown up in a small house where nothing stayed hidden for long, and she knew how to recognize the signs that something was being deliberately concealed. There was a door at the end of that corridor that was always closed, and sometimes when the house was quiet, Ellen swore she heard sounds coming from there. They weren't noises of old furniture or creaking wood. They were mechanical, rhythmic, sounds like machines operating. That night, when she went to apply the cream to Sebastian, Ellen decided it was time to ask more direct questions. He seemed more relaxed than on previous days, almost intimate in the way he lay down on the bed and waited for her to begin. There was a growing trust between them, an intimacy that transcended the physical. "Sebastian," she said while massaging his shoulders, "can I ask you something?" "Ask," he replied, his voice slightly drowsy. "Why is there a wing of the house that no one talks about? That corridor that's always closed off?" Ellen felt Sebastian's body stiffen completely under her. His breathing changed, became more shallow, more rapid. When he turned to face her, there was an expression in his eyes that Ellen had never seen before, a mixture of fear, pain, and something that seemed very much like panic. "Who spoke to you about that?" he asked, his voice tense. "No one said anything. That's exactly the problem," Ellen replied, not letting herself be intimidated by his tone. "Every time I ask, people change the subject, and I've been hearing noises coming from there." Sebastian sat up on the bed, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of despair that broke Ellen's heart. When he looked at her again, there were tears in his eyes. "There are things in this house that it's better you don't know about, Ellen, for your own good." Sebastian's evasive response only increased Ellen's curiosity. In the days that followed, she began to observe the estate with different eyes, noticing details that had previously escaped her. There was a specific routine that involved that forbidden wing. Every morning, a woman that Ellen didn't know arrived in a white van and entered through the back door. She wore a nurse's uniform and carried a medical bag. She stayed at the estate for a few hours and then left, always through the same door, always avoiding eye contact with the other employees. Ellen tried to ask some of the older staff about the woman, but the answers were always the same. Uncomfortable looks, abrupt changes of subject, excuses to move away from the conversation. It was as if the entire estate conspired to keep a secret that she was increasingly determined to discover. The dreams were also becoming more intense. Every night, Ellen saw the same brown-haired woman, but now she could see more details of the room where she was. There was a crucifix on the wall, fresh flowers on a small bedside table, and a chair where someone clearly spent long hours sitting. The woman in the dream sometimes moved her lips as if trying to speak, but Ellen could never hear the words. There was a desperate urgency in her eyes, as if she were trying to communicate something extremely important. It was on a rainy Thursday, when fog covered the mountains like a heavy mantle, that Ellen finally decided to investigate on her own. Mrs. Connie had gone to town to shop. Most of the employees were looking after the cattle in the more distant pasture, and Sebastian was locked in his study, dealing with some financial matters that had arrived by phone from Richmond. Ellen knew she had little time. She took a set of old keys that she had seen on a hook in the kitchen, keys that Mrs. Connie always guarded with special care, and walked to the forbidden corridor. Her heart was beating so hard that she was sure the sound echoed off the walls. The first door was locked, but the third key she tried worked. What Ellen found on the other side of that door left her completely floored. It was a room that had been transformed into an improvised hospital. There were machines connected to a bed, monitors showing vital signs, an IV stand, and there, lying between immaculate white sheets, was the woman from her dreams. The woman that Ellen saw every night screaming in silence was there, real, breathing through machines, her brown hair spread on the pillow as Ellen had seen so many times. "What are you doing here?" The cold voice at Ellen's back made her turn quickly, her heart almost stopping. At the door of the room stood the nurse she had seen arriving in the morning, a woman of about 40, thin, with grey eyes that seemed capable of seeing through people's souls. She wore an impeccably white uniform and carried a syringe in her hand. I got lost," Ellen stammered, knowing the excuse sounded ridiculous. "Don't lie to me," the woman said, closing the door behind her. "I'm Martha Silver, Mrs. Montgomery's private nurse, and you're the new employee who's been asking too many questions." Ellen felt the blood freeze in her veins. Mrs. Montgomery, the woman in the bed, was Sebastian's wife. He was married, and his wife was there, in a vegetative state, connected to machines that kept her alive. "She is," Ellen began, but the words died in her throat. "Your employer's wife," Martha completed, a cruel smile forming on her thin lips. "Marianne Montgomery, 2 years in a coma, since the accident that almost killed them both. Interesting that no one mentioned this to you, isn't it?" Ellen leaned against the wall, feeling her legs weaken. Everything made sense now. Sebastian's isolation, the guilt she saw in his eyes, the way he always pulled back whenever he seemed to be allowing himself to feel something. "Why isn't she in a hospital?" Ellen asked, her voice coming out weak. Martha approached the bed and adjusted one of the devices with precise, cold movements. "Because her husband prefers it this way. He can control her better here, can pretend she doesn't exist when he needs to have fun with the new little maids." The insinuation poisoned the air in the room. Ellen felt a fury she had never experienced before rise like bile in her throat. "It's not like that," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "The treatment I do with him is medical." "Oh, of course," Martha laughed, a humorless sound. "Medical treatment? Is that what you call it now? And tell me, young lady, how many nights have you already spent in his room? How many times has he already touched you?" Ellen couldn't answer. Martha's words were like poison, planting seeds of doubt and shame that she didn't know how to combat. "He didn't tell you, did he?" Martha continued, approaching Ellen with calculated steps. "Didn't tell you that they were in the car together that night? That she tried to prevent him from doing something stupid and ended up paying the price? That he was drunk and angry because she had discovered about the other women?" Ellen felt the world spin around her. The other women. Sebastian had a history of involvements with female employees. "You don't know anything, girl," Martha said, returning to the bed where Marianne Montgomery breathed artificially. "You don't know that his fortune is tied up in a marriage clause that obligates him to care for her until death. You don't know that he has already tried to rid himself of this responsibility several times. And you don't know that you're not the first young maid he uses to distract himself from guilt." Ellen needed to get out of there. The air in the room was suffocating, loaded with revelations that destroyed all her certainties. She walked to the door, but Martha held her by the arm with surprising strength. "If I were you, girl, I would be more careful," she whispered in Ellen's ear. "Marianne here was just like you when she married him. Young, innocent, full of dreams. See where she ended up." Ellen shook free from Martha's grip and ran out of the room, tears already streaming down her face. She ran through the corridors of the estate without destination, just wanting to get away from that place, from those revelations that destroyed everything she had begun to believe in. It was when she was in the garden, trying to catch her breath between sobs, that Ellen saw Sebastian walking in her direction. He had left the study and was looking for her, probably concerned about the screams she couldn't contain while running. When he saw her there crying, his eyes filled with a concern that seemed genuine. "Ellen, what happened? Are you okay?" But when he extended his hand to touch her face, Ellen backed away as if his touch burned. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice cutting. Don't you dare touch me. Sebastian stopped, his hand still extended in the air, his eyes confused and hurt. Ellen, tell me what's happening. Your wife, Ellen said, the words coming out like an accusation. Why didn't you tell me about your wife? Ellen's question hung in the humid air of the garden like a cannon shot. Sebastian closed his eyes, the hand he had extended to her falling heavily to his side. When he looked at her again, there was a painful resignation in his expression, as if he knew this moment would inevitably arrive. You saw her, he said. It wasn't a question. I did, Ellen replied, her voice still trembling with tears and anger. Your wife has been there for 2 years, connected to machines, and you didn't say a word. You let me take care of you, touch you, get involved, without telling me you were married. Sebastian ran his hands over his face, a tired gesture of a man carrying a burden too heavy. I wanted to tell you. Every day I thought about how to do it without you running away. And you thought it was better to lie by omission. I never lied to you, Ellen. His voice came out harder, but there was pleading in his eyes. I just didn't know how to explain a situation that I don't fully understand myself. Ellen felt a mixture of anger and compassion waging a battle inside her chest. As much as she wanted to hate him at that moment, she couldn't ignore the genuine pain she saw in his expression. Then explain now, she said, crossing her arms in a defensive posture. Explain everything. Sebastian looked at the mountains. That stretched in the distance, as if seeking strength in the familiar landscape. When he began to speak, his voice carried the weight of 2 years of accumulated guilt. Marianne and I married 5 years ago, a marriage arranged by the families. You know how these things are among traditional Virginia families. She was from Oakwood too, a daughter of farmers, educated to be an exemplary wife. He paused, the words seeming painful to pronounce. She was good, Ellen. Pure, caring, always trying to make me happy even when I didn't deserve it. Ellen felt a pang of something she didn't know whether was jealousy or compassion. And you? Did you love her? I tried, Sebastian replied with brutal honesty. God knows I tried, but there was something in me that always sabotaged everything good that came into my life. I drank too much, worked too much, pushed her away when she needed me most. And the other women? Ellen asked, remembering Martha's venomous words. Sebastian closed his eyes as if he had taken a punch. You spoke with Martha. Answer the question. There were others, yes, he admitted, his voice breaking. Not many, but there were. I was destroying my marriage, destroying Marianne, and I couldn't stop. It was as if I had a demon inside me that needed to ruin everything. Ellen felt the tears return. They weren't tears of anger now, but of a deep disillusionment that hurt, more than she expected. That night, Sebastian continued, I had returned from a business trip. Marianne had found messages on my phone, evidence of an affair I had had in New York. She confronted me, crying, begging me to change, for us to try to have children, to build a real family. And you? I left the house, he said, his voice laden with self-contempt. I went to a bar, drank until I couldn't take it anymore, and then got in the car determined never to come back. I was leaving, Ellen, going to abandon everything and everyone like a coward. Ellen felt a shiver run down her spine. But she went after you. She caught up with me on the road, driving her car, yelling through the window for me to stop. It was raining heavily. The road was slippery. Sebastian stopped talking, his hands visibly trembling. I was too drunk to think straight. When I saw that she was following me, I stepped even harder on the accelerator. I wanted her to give up, wanted her to let me go away far from here. What happened? She tried to overtake me, probably to cut me off in front and force me to stop. But there was a curve and her car skidded. I saw everything in the rearview mirror, the car spinning, going off the road, down the embankment. Sebastian covered his face with his hands. I stopped and went down after her. She was unconscious, bleeding. I brought her to the hospital in my own arms, Ellen. She's been in a coma ever since. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Ellen tried to process everything she had heard, to understand the layers of guilt and pain that had transformed Sebastian into the isolated man she had met. "Why isn't she in a hospital in Richmond?" Ellen finally asked. "Because I promised. Her I would care for her personally," he replied. "In the first week after the accident, I stayed at the hospital day and night. One night, I swore that if she woke up, I would be the man she always wanted me to be. And if she didn't wake up, I would spend the rest of my life taking care of her." "And the nurse, Martha?" "Martha worked at the hospital where Marianne was admitted in the first months. She knows every detail of my wife's medical condition. When I decided to bring Marianne home, she offered to continue the care here." Sebastian looked directly at Ellen. "Martha never approved of my decision. She thinks Marianne should be in a specialized institution." Ellen remembered the nurse's cold look, the cruel words she had used. "She doesn't like me." "Martha doesn't like any woman who gets close to me," Sebastian said. "She thinks any attempt of mine to move on is a betrayal to Marianne. And isn't it?" The question came out of Ellen's mouth before she could think better of it. Sebastian stared at her with an intensity that made her feel naked. "I don't know, Ellen. I've spent 2 years asking myself that every day. Marianne is alive but not alive. She breathes, her heart beats, but there has been no sign of consciousness for 2 years. The doctors say the chances of her waking up are practically non-existent." "But you're still married to her?" "Legally, yes, and morally." He made a painful pause. "I don't know anymore what's right or wrong. I only know that when you arrived here, for the first time in 2 years, I felt that maybe there was still hope for me, that maybe I could be more than just guilt and remorse." Ellen felt the defenses she had built begin to crack. There was a sincerity in Sebastian's voice that was difficult to ignore, a vulnerability that touched something deep in her heart. "The other women that Martha mentioned were before the accident," Sebastian interrupted. "Since I brought Marianne home, there has been no one else until you." "I am not anyone," Ellen said, but the words came out without conviction. "You are everything," he replied, slowly approaching her. "You are light in a house that was dead, Ellen. You are hope in a man who had given up on living." Ellen wanted to move away, wanted to run, wanted to protect her heart from the confusion of feelings she was experiencing. But her feet seemed glued to the ground, her eyes fixed on his. "This is wrong," she whispered. "I know," he whispered back, "but I can't stop feeling." And then, before Ellen could think, before she could raise her defenses again, Sebastian kissed her. It was a desperate kiss loaded with 2 years of loneliness and guilt, of weeks of growing tension, of a love that was born in impossible circumstances. Ellen melted against him for a moment, allowing herself to feel everything she had tried to deny. But then, reality hit her like a bucket of cold water. She moved away abruptly, her hand flying to her lips, as if she could erase what had just happened. "I can't," she said, the tears returning. "I can't do this to her. I can't do this to myself." And before Sebastian could respond, Ellen ran back into the house, leaving him alone in the garden with the weight of his own choices. Ellen spent the entire night awake, staring at the ceiling of the small room she occupied on the second floor of the house. Sebastian's kiss still burned on her lips, like a mark of hot iron, and his confession echoed in her mind without giving her a break. She tried to organize her feelings, to separate right from wrong, but everything seemed blurred in a fog of guilt and desire that suffocated her. When the sun rose, Ellen had made a decision that hurt in her chest like a dagger. She was leaving Montgomery Estate. She could no longer pretend that this was just a job. She could no longer ignore the feelings that grew inside her like a storm. And mainly, she could no longer look at Sebastian knowing that there was a woman in the forbidden corridor who breathed through machines while they kissed in the garden. Mrs. Connie found her in the kitchen at 5 in the morning, making coffee, with trembling hands and eyes red from so much crying. "Child, what's that face?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," the housekeeper said, but there was something in her tone that suggested she already knew, at least in part, what was happening. "Mrs. Connie," Ellen said, her voice hoarse, "I need to leave." The older woman stopped in the middle of the kitchen, her expression hardening. "Leave? Why?" I can't work here anymore. It's not right. Mrs. Connie approached and pulled out a chair, sitting at the kitchen table with a heavy sigh. Ellen, sit here with me. Let's talk like two adult women. Ellen obeyed, but kept her eyes fixed on the coffee cup between her hands. You discovered about Mrs. Marianne, didn't you? Mrs. Connie asked gently. Ellen nodded, not trusting her own voice. And now you feel guilty for having gotten involved. With the master? I didn't get involved with him, Ellen protested, but the words sounded weak even to herself. Mrs. Connie smiled sadly. Child, I've been raising people since I was 16 years old. I know how to recognize love when I see it, and you are in love with Sebastian. Ellen felt the tears return. That doesn't matter. He is married. She is there, breathing, alive, and I... And you what? Fell in love with a good man who went through a tragedy? Mrs. Connie interrupted. Ellen, this family has carried heavy burdens for generations. Sebastian's father was also a complicated man, and his grandfather before him. But the boy I helped raise has a good heart, even if he doesn't believe it himself. Mrs. Connie, you don't understand. I can't be with a married man. I was raised to be a strong and honorable woman, I know. Your grandmother told me about the upbringing she gave you. Mrs. Connie paused, her eyes shining with something that seemed like a distant memory. Did you know that I knew your grandmother, Ellen? Ellen quickly raised her head, surprised. What do you mean? Mary Graves worked in this house when I was younger. She was the housekeeper here before me, in the days of Sebastian's father. The revelation fell on Ellen like lightning. Your grandmother never told you this? Ellen shook her head, completely lost. Grandma never talked about working on estates. She always said she worked in family homes in Oakwood. Because she left. Here under complicated circumstances, Mrs. Connie said, choosing her words carefully. Sebastian's father, Mr. James, was a difficult man. Drank a lot, treated the employees badly, and Mary Graves was one of the few people who had the courage to confront him when he mistreated a young girl who worked in the kitchen. Ellen felt as if the floor was moving beneath her feet. Her grandmother had worked at Montgomery Estate. There was a connection between her family and that house that she had never known existed. Why are you telling me this now? Because maybe. It's not a coincidence that you arrived here, child. Your grandmother always said that things happen for a reason, that God has bigger plans than we can see. Mrs. Connie took Ellen's hands between hers. Sebastian has been suffering for 2 years. He punishes himself every day for something that wasn't entirely his fault. And you arrived here and brought light to his eyes for the first time since the accident. But what about Mrs. Marianne? Marianne is in a situation that none of the doctors can properly explain, Mrs. Connie said sadly. She hasn't woken up even once in 2 years, doesn't respond to stimuli, doesn't react to anything. It's as if her soul has already departed, but her body still doesn't know it. Ellen felt a shiver run down her spine. Do you think she won't wake up? I think Marianne has already made her choice, child, and maybe it's time for Sebastian to make his. At that moment, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor toward the kitchen. Sebastian appeared at the door, his hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. He had also spent the night awake. Ellen, he said, his voice hoarse with fatigue and emotion. I need to talk to you. Mrs. Connie got up discreetly. I'll see how things are outside, she murmured, leaving the kitchen and leaving the two of them alone. Sebastian approached slowly, as if he were approaching a wounded animal. You're leaving, aren't you? Ellen couldn't deny it. I need to go, Sebastian. This isn't right. I know it's not, he said, sitting in the chair that Mrs. Connie had vacated. Nothing in my life has been right for a long time. But you... He paused, his eyes seeking hers. You are the only right thing that has happened to me in the last 2 years. Sebastian, you are married. Your wife is there in the corridor needing you. Marianne doesn't need me, Ellen. She needs medical care, and she has that. But she doesn't need me as a man, as a companion. She doesn't even know I exist. And if she wakes up, and if one day she opens her eyes and discovers that you've moved on. Sebastian closed his eyes, as if the question were a stab. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times, and the answer is always the same. If she wakes up, I will take care of her forever. But what if she never wakes up? What if I spend the rest of my life waiting for something that will never happen? Ellen felt her heart breaking. She saw the genuine pain in his eyes, the guilt that corroded him from within, the desperate love he felt for her mixed with the loyalty he had to his wife. "There's something I didn't tell you yesterday," Sebastian said, taking a crumpled envelope from his shirt pocket. "I found this under your pillow last night." Ellen frowned and took the envelope. It was addressed to her in handwriting she immediately recognized. It was her grandmother's handwriting. "How did this end up under my pillow?" she asked, confused. "I don't know. Martha said she found it in Marianne's room and thought it was for you." Ellen opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a 2-page letter written in the careful handwriting she knew so well. "My dear Ellen," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means that fate has finally led you to Montgomery Estate, as I always knew would happen one day. There are things about our family and that house that I never had the courage to tell you, but that you need to know now." Ellen stopped reading, her hands trembling. "Sebastian, how is it possible that my grandmother wrote a letter? She knew I would read here." "Keep reading," he said gently. "I worked in this house for 5 years when I was younger," Ellen continued, reading aloud. "It was here that I met your grandfather, and it was because of this estate that we had to flee to Oakwood. There was a boy here at the time, son of the employers, a little blonde boy with dark eyes who always asked me to tell him stories. His name was Sebastian." Ellen stopped reading and looked at Sebastian, who had gone completely pale. Ellen looked at Sebastian with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "You remember my grandmother?" Sebastian ran his hand through his hair, his eyes distant as if he were trying to reach memories buried decades ago. "Mary Graves," he murmured. "She told stories about woodland sprites and mountain spirits every night, before I went to sleep. She had gentle hands and always smelled of lavender." Ellen felt the tears return. Her grandmother had mentioned those stories many times, always saying she had told them to a special child in the past, but never revealing who it was. "Keep reading," Sebastian asked, his voice tense with emotion. Ellen returned her eyes to the letter, her hands still trembling. Sebastian was different from the other children in the house. There was a sadness in him that didn't match his age, a loneliness that broke my heart. I saw in him the same emptiness that I carried from having lost my parents at a very young age. That's why I became attached to him, as if he were my own grandson. Ellen's voice faltered. She needed a few moments to compose herself before continuing. "But his parents didn't like our closeness. They thought I was spoiling the boy, that I was overstepping the boundaries of my place. When your grandfather appeared at the estate, he was a blacksmith and came to repair the farming tools, and we began to get close. That was the last straw. A maid getting involved with an outside man, creating emotional bonds with the employers. Son, I was fired the same day." Ellen stopped reading and looked at Sebastian. "You remember this?" "I remember the day she left," Sebastian said, his voice laden with an old pain. "I was very young, about 6 years old, but I remember crying a lot. She was the only person in the house who treated me with real affection. My parents were cold, distant. Mary Graves was like a grandmother I never had." Ellen felt her heart breaking. Imagining Sebastian as a lonely child, losing the only source of affection he knew, made her better understand the wounded man he had become. "There's more," she said, returning to the letter. "Ellen, my dear, it may seem impossible, but I always knew that one day you would return to that estate. I dreamed about it many times over the years. I watched you grow and become a strong and kind woman, and I always knew that fate would lead you back to the boy I helped care for." Ellen interrupted the reading again, looking at Sebastian with amazement. How could she know? "Your grandmother was always special," Sebastian said. "Even when I was a child, she seemed to know things that she had no way of knowing. She said she had dreams that sometimes came true." Ellen continued reading, her voice increasingly emotional. "If you are reading this, it means that you have met, and probably are facing a difficult situation. I know you were raised with rigid values, my child, But sometimes the heart leads us down paths that reason cannot understand. Sebastian was always a wounded soul, and you were always a healing soul. Perhaps that's why fate has brought you together." Tears were flowing freely down Ellen's face now. It was as if her grandmother were there in the kitchen with them, offering the wisdom she always sought in the most difficult moments. Don't let guilt prevent you from following your heart, Ellen, but also don't ignore your conscience. If there's one thing I learned in life, it's that true love always finds a way to be honest and right. Trust your heart, but also trust your soul. They will show you the right path. Ellen stopped reading, the last lines of the letter becoming blurred by tears. Sebastian rose from the chair and walked to the kitchen window, his shoulders tense. "Did she sign it?" he asked without turning around. Ellen looked at the end of the letter. "With eternal love, Mary Graves." And there's a P.S. "Sebastian, if you are reading this too, know that I never forgot you. You were like a grandson to me, and my love for you never diminished. Be happy, boy. You deserve to be happy." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Ellen could see Sebastian's shoulders trembling slightly, and she knew he was crying. "How did this letter end up in Marianne's room?" Ellen finally asked. Sebastian turned around, his eyes red but determined. "I don't know. Martha said she found it on the nightstand, along with some personal things of Marianne's that I had never seen before." "What kind of things?" "Old photos, some letters she received from friends, a diary." Sebastian paused. "Ellen, I think there are more things about this house, about our history, that we still don't know." At that moment, Mrs. Connie returned to the kitchen, but stopped at the door when she saw the two with faces marked by tears. "You found the letter," she said. It wasn't a question. "Mrs. Connie, did you know about this?" Ellen asked. The housekeeper approached slowly. "I knew that Mary Graves left some things for you before she died. She asked me to keep them until you arrived here." "But how did she to know I would come here?" "Because she dreamed it, child. Mary Graves always had the gift of dreaming about the future. She dreamed about you working in this house, dreamed about you and Sebastian meeting, dreamed even about—" Mrs. Connie hesitated. "About what?" Sebastian asked. "About the choice you will have to make," she said finally. "A choice that will change the destiny of everyone in this house." Ellen felt a shiver run down her spine. "What choice?" Before Mrs. Connie could answer, the sound of a siren echoed from the forbidden corridor. It was the alarm of Marianne's medical equipment. Sebastian ran toward the sound, Ellen right behind him. When they reached the medical room, they found Martha working frantically on the devices, her face tense with concentration. "What's happening?" Sebastian asked, breathless. "Her vital functions suddenly spiked," Martha replied, without taking her eyes off the monitors. "Heart rate and blood pressure rose suddenly. It's as if—" "As if what?" Ellen asked. Martha looked at them with a strange expression, as if she were reacting to something, or to someone. Ellen approached the bed where Marianne was lying and observed the pale face of the woman. For the first time she noticed how similar they were, the same delicate bone structure, the same hair color, even the same height. It was as if she were looking at a version of herself in a vegetative state. And then, to the astonishment of everyone in the room, Marianne Montgomery opened her eyes. The silence that followed was absolute. Marianne blinked a few times, her brown eyes slowly focusing on the surroundings. Her gaze swept over the devices, the room, until finally fixing on Sebastian's face. "Sebastian?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from 2 years of silence. Sebastian staggered as if he had been punched. Ellen felt the world spin around her. Martha began to frantically check Marianne's vital signs, muttering something about medical miracle and scientific impossibility. But Ellen barely heard the nurse's words. She could only think of one thing. The woman whom the man she had fallen in love with was married to had awakened, and now she had to choose between the love she felt and the conscience that guided her. Marianne Montgomery had returned to claim her place in Sebastian's life at exactly the moment Ellen had decided to fight for hers. Marianne Montgomery's awakening transformed the estate into a whirlwind of doctors, specialists, and an atmosphere charged with tension that Ellen could feel in every breath. In the 3 days that followed, the house was turned upside down. Sebastian didn't leave his wife's side, alternating between the relief of seeing her alive and a renewed guilt that seemed to consume him completely. Ellen tried to keep her distance, but it was impossible to ignore what was happening. Marianne had awakened with serious gaps in her memory. She remembered the marriage, life before the accident, but nothing from the last few months before the tragedy. She didn't remember the fights, the betrayals, the reason why she had left the house that rainy night to follow her husband. For her, Sebastian was still the man she had fallen in love with years ago, and she had awakened as if it were just another day in a happy marriage. "It's a type of selective amnesia," Dr. Henry explained to Sebastian in a conversation that Ellen overheard by chance while tidying up the library. "The brain sometimes blocks traumatic memories as a protection mechanism. She may recover these memories over time, or she may never remember." Ellen felt her stomach contract. Part of her wished that Marianne would never remember the problems in their marriage, that she could live in the illusion that she had been happy. But another part, a darker part that she tried to suppress, wished that she would remember everything and decide on her own that she no longer wanted to live with Sebastian. The guilt for having these thoughts consumed her almost as much as the love she felt for him. Martha, in turn, had transformed into an even colder and more calculating version of herself. She monopolized Marianne's care, creating an almost insurmountable barrier between the patient and anyone else in the house. Ellen saw her whispering in Marianne's ear, showing photos, apparently trying to help her recover her memories. "She's manipulating the situation," Mrs. Connie murmured to Ellen one morning as they prepared breakfast. "Martha has always been obsessed with controlling everything that happens in this house. Now that the mistress has awakened, she thinks she can shape her memories the way she wants." "What do you mean by that?" "That she's telling Marianne only the versions of the facts that suit her. She's making her believe that the marriage was always perfect, that Sebastian was always an exemplary husband." Ellen felt a stab of anger. "And Sebastian allows this?" "Sebastian feels so lost in his own guilt that he can't think straight," Mrs. Connie sighed. "He thinks he owes everything to Marianne after what happened. He's willing to live a lie if it makes her happy." That afternoon, Ellen finally had a face-to-face encounter with Marianne. She was bringing a tray with tea to the medical room when she found Marianne sitting in a wheelchair in the garden, looking at the mountains in the distance. Martha wasn't around, probably had gone to fetch some medication. "You must be Ellen," Marianne said when she saw the young woman approach. Her voice was still weak, but there was a genuine gentleness to it. "Sebastian told me about you." Ellen stopped, not knowing how to respond. "How are you feeling?" "Confused," Marianne admitted with a sad smile. "It's strange to lose 2 years of your life like this. One moment I was arguing with Sebastian about having children, the next I'm waking up and discovering I almost died." Ellen felt her heart race. "You remember the argument?" "Not clearly. They're fragments, you know. Like pieces of a dream that you try to remember but that always slip through your fingers." Marianne looked her directly in the eyes. "Sebastian said you took very good care of him during my absence. Thank you for that." The sincerity in Marianne's thanks was like a knife to Ellen's chest. This woman was thanking her for the very thing that made her feel most guilty. "I was just doing my job," Ellen murmured. "He's different," Marianne continued, still looking at the landscape. "More mature, perhaps. There's a sadness in his eyes that wasn't there before. Martha said it was because he saw me in that state for so long, but I think there's more to it than that." Ellen didn't know what to say. How could she explain to a woman who had just awakened from a coma that she had fallen in love with her husband? "Can I ask you something, Ellen?" Marianne turned in her chair to face her completely. "Do you think people can change? That someone can be one person for years and then become completely different?" The question caught Ellen off guard. "I don't think so. Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes I look at Sebastian and feel as if he were a stranger, as if the man I married had died in the accident along with me, and now there's a different person in his place." Ellen felt a shiver. Marianne had touched exactly on the point that she herself had perceived. The Sebastian she had met was not the same man described in the stories about the past. Maybe people change when they go through tragedies, Ellen suggested carefully. Or maybe I'm the one who's changed, Marianne said, more to herself than to Ellen. Maybe I died in that car and the person who woke up is someone completely different too. At that moment, Sebastian appeared in the garden, walking toward them. Ellen saw his expression change when he realized the two were talking. There was fear in his eyes, as if he dreaded what Marianne might have discovered. "How are you feeling?" he asked his wife, but Ellen noticed that his eyes sought hers for a moment. "Better," Marianne replied. "Ellen is pleasant company. We were talking about changes." Sebastian seemed to tense up. "What kind of changes?" "Changes that happen to people when they go through traumatic experiences," Marianne explained. "Ellen thinks that tragedies can completely transform someone." "Ellen is right," Sebastian said, finally looking directly at her. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her heart race. Sometimes tragedies destroy who we were before and force us to build a completely new person. "And do you think that's good or bad?" Marianne asked. Sebastian took time to respond, his eyes still fixed on Ellen. "I think it depends on who the person becomes afterward." Ellen felt her cheeks catch fire. There were subtexts in that conversation that Marianne couldn't perceive, but that burned like hot iron between her and Sebastian. "I should go back to my room," Marianne said, seeming to notice the tension in the air without understanding exactly what it was. "I still get tired very easily." Sebastian began to push the wheelchair, but Marianne stopped him. "Ellen can take me," she said. "You two seem to have a lot in common. Perhaps she can help me understand some things about the last 2 years." Ellen and Sebastian exchanged a meaningful look. He nodded almost imperceptibly, as if entrusting her with something very precious. As she pushed Marianne's wheelchair through the corridors of the estate, Ellen felt as if she were walking on a tightrope. Every word they exchanged, every silence, every look, everything seemed to have the potential to explode the delicate situation they were in. "Ellen," Marianne said when they reached the door of the medical room, "can I trust you?" The question hit Ellen like lightning. "Of course. I have the feeling that there are things people aren't telling me, important things about what happened before the accident, about who I was, about who Sebastian was." Marianne looked her directly in the eyes. "If you know anything, please tell me. I need to know the truth, even if it hurts." Ellen felt as if she were being tested by fate itself. There was the opportunity to tell everything about Sebastian's betrayals, about the problems in their marriage, about the love she herself felt for him. But when she looked into Marianne's trusting eyes, she knew she couldn't shatter the life of this woman who had just awakened from a 2-year nightmare. "If I know anything important, I'll tell you," she promised, knowing she was lying. Marianne smiled and squeezed her hand. "Thank you, I knew I could trust you." When Ellen left the room, she found Sebastian waiting in the corridor, his expression anxious. "What did she say?" he asked in a low voice. "That she feels there are things you're not telling her," Ellen replied. "Sebastian, she's going to discover the truth sooner or later. It would be better if it came from you." "I can't," he said, running his hands through his hair. "You saw how fragile she is. How can I go to her and say that our marriage was destroyed, that I betrayed her multiple times, that she almost died because of me? And how can you live a lie?" Sebastian moved closer to her, so close that Ellen could feel the heat emanating from his body. "Ellen, I don't know any more what's right or wrong. I only know that I can't lose her again, and I can't lose you either." Before Ellen could respond, Martha's cold voice echoed down the corridor. "What a touching scene," she said, appearing from one of the side doors. The devoted husband and the dedicated maid discussing care for the invalid wife, Sebastian. Quickly moved away from Ellen, but Martha had seen everything she needed to see. "Don't worry," she continued with a cruel smile. "Your secret is safe with me, for now." Martha's veiled threat hung over the estate like a cloud heavy with storm. During the days that followed, Ellen felt the nurse's cold eyes following her every movement, every conversation with Sebastian, every gesture that could be interpreted as something beyond a professional relationship. The tension was almost unbearable. Marianne, meanwhile, showed increasingly clear signs that her memories were returning gradually. Loose comments about arguments she shouldn't remember, specific questions about Sebastian's behavior, suspicious looks when she thought no one was watching. Ellen could sense that it was only a matter of time until the truth came to light. It was on a Thursday afternoon that everything began to crumble. Ellen was in the library organizing some documents when she heard raised voices coming from the medical room. She carefully approached and recognized the voices of Marianne and Martha. "You're lying to me," Marianne was saying, her voice stronger than Ellen had heard since she had awakened. "I remember now. I remember the messages on his phone, the nights. He came home late smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. Mrs. Marianne, you're still confused. The doctor said you might have memory failures, create memories that aren't—" "No," Marianne interrupted her. "I remember the argument. I remember getting in the car to go after him. I remember seeing him kissing that woman at the bar before driving away drunk." Ellen felt her blood freeze. Marianne was recovering her memories of the accident. "And you," Marianne continued, her voice laden with a fury that grew with each word. "You knew everything and took his side." "You always took his side, didn't you? You always had a little crush on my husband, always waited for an opportunity." "I'm here to take care of you, nothing more," Martha replied, but Ellen could hear the nervousness in her voice. "Liar!" Marianne shouted. "You're here because you're obsessed with him, because you think if you keep me dependent, if you keep me weak, eventually he'll notice you. But he'll never want you, Martha. Never." The silence that followed was heavy. Ellen heard quick footsteps and hid behind a bookshelf when Martha left the room with her face contorted in anger. The nurse passed by without noticing her presence and headed towards Sebastian's study. Ellen waited a few minutes before approaching Marianne's room. She found her sitting on the bed, her hands trembling, tears rolling down her face. "Marianne," Ellen called softly. The woman looked at her, and Ellen saw in her eyes a cutting lucidity that hadn't been there in previous days. "You knew," Marianne said. It wasn't a question. Ellen felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Marianne, you knew about his betrayals, about the kind of man he was before the accident, and yet you fell in love with him." Ellen couldn't deny it. The words died in her throat before the intensity of Marianne's gaze. "Sit here," Marianne said, patting the bed beside her. "Let's talk like two women who love the same man." Ellen hesitated but obeyed. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands intertwined in her lap, waiting for the explosion of anger that she was sure would come. "Do you love him?" Marianne asked directly. Ellen began, but Marianne interrupted her. "Don't lie. I see how you look at each other. I see how he's changed since you arrived here. Do you love him?" "Yes," Ellen admitted, her voice coming out as a whisper. Marianne nodded as if the confirmation were a relief. "And does he love you?" Ellen felt tears burn her eyes. "He said he does." "Then there's something you need to know," Marianne said, wiping her own tears. "I don't love him anymore." The confession fell upon Ellen like lightning. She looked at Marianne without understanding. "I remember everything now," Marianne continued. "I remember how our marriage was destroyed, how I begged him to change, how he promised and then did everything the same. I remember deciding that night that I was going to ask for a divorce." Ellen could barely breathe. "Then why didn't I say anything when I woke up?" Marianne smiled sadly. "Because when I woke up and saw the guilt in his eyes, saw how he had changed, I thought that maybe we could try again, but then I saw how he looked at you." Ellen felt as if she were dreaming. This conversation was surreal. "Marianne, I never wanted—" "I know," Marianne interrupted her. "You didn't want to fall in love with a married man, just as he didn't want to fall in love with you. But it happened. And you know something? I'm glad it happened." "How can you be glad?" "Because for the first time in years I see Sebastian being genuinely happy. I see real love in his eyes, not that guilty obligation he always felt for me." Marianne took Ellen's hands. Ellen, our marriage died long before the accident. We both knew that. The only reason I went after him that night wasn't to save him. It was to have the final conversation about the divorce. Ellen was crying now, sobs that came from deep in her chest. But you almost died because of it. I almost died because it was a stormy night and I was driving emotionally distressed. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't just his fault. It was an accident, Ellen. A terrible accident that changed all of our lives. Martha said his fortune is tied up in a marriage clause. Marianne laughed, a bitter sound. Martha says a lot of things. The truth is that there is a clause, yes, but it only applies if I die or if I ask for divorce due to infidelity. If we both agree to the divorce, he keeps his fortune. Ellen felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you both to be happy, Marianne said simply, and because I want to be free to be happy too. What do you mean? Marianne smiled, and for the first time since she had awakened, Ellen saw a genuine light in her eyes. During these 2 years of coma, I dreamed of a different life, with a man who truly loved me, who respected me. And you know what I discovered? That this man exists. He is Dr. Henry. Ellen widened her eyes. The doctor. He stayed by my side the whole time in the hospital, long before Sebastian decided to bring me home. He talked to me even when I was unconscious, took care of me as if I were the most important person in the world. When I woke up and saw him, I felt something I had never felt even during the best moments of my marriage with Sebastian. Ellen was speechless. The twist was so unexpected that she could barely process it. Marianne, are you sure about this? I've never been so sure of anything in my life, Marianne replied. Ellen, I spent 2 years dead. When I woke up, it was like getting a second chance to live. And I'm not going to waste that chance pretending I still love a man I no longer love, no matter how good a person he is now. At that moment, raised voices echoed down the corridor. Ellen recognized Sebastian's voice and Martha's, heatedly arguing in the study. I think it's time for all of us to stop pretending, Marianne said, getting up from the bed with determination. Let's end this charade once and for all. Ellen followed her, her heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. When they reached the study, they found Sebastian and Martha in a fierce argument. You can't do this to her, Martha was shouting. She's fragile, confused. It's not the time for drastic decisions. What decisions? Marianne asked from the door, making both of them turn around. Sebastian paled when he saw her. Marianne, You what? She asked, entering the study followed by Ellen. You were talking about me, weren't you? Martha stepped forward. Your husband was wanting to make decisions about your life without consulting you. He was talking about putting you in a specialized clinic. Martha, that's not true, Sebastian protested. Then tell me the truth, Sebastian, Marianne said, stopping in front of him. Tell me what you were discussing. Sebastian looked at Ellen, then at Marianne, and finally found the courage to speak. I was telling Martha that I want to divorce you, he said, his voice firm but gentle, because I've fallen in love with Ellen, and because I know you deserve to be truly loved, not out of obligation or guilt. The silence that followed was absolute. Martha was white as paper. Ellen held her breath, and Marianne smiled. Thank God, she said, sighing. I thought I would never have the courage to say it first. 6 months later, Ellen was at the antique market in Middleton, organizing a small stall where she sold handcrafted notebooks with hand-embroidered fabric covers, skills she had learned from her grandmother and rediscovered during the tumultuous months that followed that transformative afternoon at Montgomery Estate. Sebastian and Marianne's divorce had been surprisingly amicable. With both parties agreeing, and with Marianne having fully recovered her mental faculties, the legal procedures were resolved in a few months. Martha had left the estate the same day, after a final argument where she accused everyone of being ungrateful and immoral. Mrs. Connie later commented that she had never seen anyone leave with so much baggage and so little dignity. Marianne moved to Richmond, where she lived in a cozy house near Dr. Henry's office. They had married in an intimate ceremony the month before, and Ellen had received a letter from her telling her she had never been so happy. I discovered that there's a difference between loving someone and being in love with someone she had written. With Sebastian, I loved the idea of what we could be. With Henry, I am in love with who he really is. Ellen had left the estate soon after the divorce, despite Sebastian's protests. She needed time to process everything that had happened, to understand her own feelings away from the intensity of that environment. Sebastian had respected her decision, even though Ellen could see the pain in his eyes when she packed her bags. "I'll wait," he had said on the morning she left. "No matter how long you need, I'll be here when you decide to come back." Ellen had spent the following months living in a small boarding house in Middleton, working as an artisan and trying to rebuild her life. The money she had saved working at the estate allowed her to take the nursing course she had always dreamed of, and now she divided her time between her studies and selling handcrafted notebooks. It was a simple life, but there was a peace to it that Ellen hadn't felt in a long time. She woke up every morning knowing exactly who she was and what she wanted, without having to navigate the moral complications that had dominated her life for so long. But there was something she couldn't deny. She missed Sebastian. Not a day passed without her thinking of him, without wondering how he was, if he was taking good care of himself, if he had found any peace after everything they had gone through together. It was on a Saturday afternoon, while tidying her stall at the end of the day, that Ellen saw him. Sebastian was walking through the main square of Middleton, his hair slightly longer than she remembered, wearing a simple cotton shirt and jeans that she had never seen him wear. He seemed different, lighter perhaps, as if a weight he had carried for years had finally been removed from his shoulders. He saw her at the same moment she saw him, and for an instant they just looked at each other across the busy square. Ellen felt her heart race, all the sensations she had tried to suppress during the last few months returning with full force. Sebastian approached slowly, as if afraid she would disappear if he moved too quickly. "Hello, Ellen," he said when he came close enough, his voice laden with an emotion he was trying to control. "Sebastian," she replied, noticing that her own voice came out hoarser than expected. "What are you doing here?" "Mrs. Connie told me where you were," he admitted. "I hope you don't mind, I needed to see you." Ellen looked at the notebooks she was putting away in a wooden box. One of them, which she always carried but never sold, contained the memories she had written about her time at Montgomery Estate. Memories about him, about them, about everything they had lived through together. "How are you?" she asked. "Alone," he answered with brutal honesty. "But not lonely, if that makes sense. For the first time in years, I'm alone by choice, not out of fear or guilt." Ellen nodded. She understood exactly what he meant. "And you?" he asked. "Are you happy?" Ellen considered the question. "I'm at peace," she said finally, "which is different from happy, but it's a good start." "Ellen," Sebastian said, moving a step closer, "can I tell you something?" She nodded. "I sold the estate," he said. "Sold everything. The house, the land, the businesses. I donated half the money. 2 charities, mainly for medical research on comas and brain trauma. With the rest, I bought a small house here in Middleton." Ellen widened her eyes. "You did what?" "I moved here," he repeated, a shy smile appearing on his lips. "Not to pressure you or pursue you, just because it was here that I felt closest to the person I really want to be." Ellen felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Sebastian." "I know you need time," he hastened to say. "I know there's still a lot that we both need to resolve. But Ellen, I wanted you to know that I've changed, really this time. Not out of guilt or obligation, but because meeting you showed me the kind of man I can be." Ellen looked at him, really looked. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability he no longer tried to hide, the quiet determination of someone who had found his path. "What do you do now?" she asked. "I'm learning carpentry," he said, and Ellen couldn't contain a smile. "It sounds stupid, I know, a former businessman making wooden furniture, but there's something therapeutic about creating beautiful things with your own hands." Ellen looked at her own hands, stained with ink from the notebook she made. "It's not stupid," she said. "It's liberating. They remained silent for a few moments, observing the movement of the square around them. There was a comfortable familiarity in that silence, an intimacy that time and distance hadn't managed to erase. "Ellen," Sebastian finally said, "I didn't come here to ask you to come back to me. I came to tell you that I'll be here, building the life I should have built years ago, and that if one day you want to be a part of that life, I would be the happiest man in the world. But if you decide that it's better for us to follow separate paths, I'll understand and respect your decision." Ellen felt something move inside her chest, a sensation she hadn't felt for months. It was hope, she realized, hope that maybe, finally, they could have something real, built on solid foundations of honesty and conscious choices. "Sebastian," she said, turning completely to face him, "would you like to have coffee with me? There's a bakery on the corner that makes the best cheese bread in the region." The smile that opened on his face was like the sun rising after a long night. "I would love to," he said. As they walked side by side toward the bakery, Ellen took the memory notebook she always carried and handed it to him. "What's this?" Sebastian asked. "Our story," she said simply. "Written from my point of view. I thought you might like to read it." Sebastian took the notebook with both hands, as if he were receiving something sacred. "You really wrote about us?" "I did," Ellen confirmed. "About everything. The good, the bad, the complicated, the beautiful. About how two wounded people can meet and heal together." "And what's the ending?" he asked, leafing through the pages handwritten in her delicate handwriting. Ellen stopped walking and faced him directly. "The ending is still being written," she said, extending her hand to him. "How about we write it together this time?" Sebastian took her hand, intertwining his fingers with a tenderness that made Ellen's heart race. "Together," he agreed, bringing her hand to his lips and gently kissing her fingers. "Together forever." As they entered the bakery hand in hand, Ellen felt a deep certainty settling in her heart. They had faced storms, guilt, secrets, and pain. They had lost and found each other several times. But now, finally, they were ready to write a new story, a love story built on conscious choices, honesty, and the courage to believe that sometimes even the most difficult journeys can lead to the most beautiful destinations. True love, Ellen realized, wasn't about perfection. It was about two imperfect people choosing to grow together, support each other, and build something beautiful from the fragments of their broken lives. And for the first time since she had